They didn't slam the door. They didn't yell. They didn't even look me in the eyes. On my 25th birthday, my mother pointed to a suitcase by the door and said, "It's time." No explanation, no apology, just a final, crushing silence. I stood there with a vanilla cake in my hand, red icing already melting under the heat. I thought love meant home. I thought family meant safety. But sometimes the people who raised you are the first to bury you. My name is Elise. I turned 25 the day everything I believed in cracked wide open. That morning, I wore my softest sweater, the one Mom used to say brought out my eyes, and bought myself a cheap coffee with an extra shot, telling myself today would be different. That maybe, just maybe, this year they'd remember. The clouds had rolled in by late afternoon, the sky a dull, heavy gray that felt like it was leaning on my chest. I stopped at the bakery near my work. The same tired teenage clerk was behind the counter. I pointed to the smallest vanilla cake in the display. He didn't smile, just scribbled "Happy Birthday" in rushed red icing and boxed it without a word. I didn't correct the spelling. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was off. That was normal. Martin, my stepfather, said it was a waste of electricity. I let myself in and was greeted by the soft flicker of the TV and the hum of a microwave. "Hey," I said, stepping into the kitchen, balancing the cake like it was a peace offering. No one responded. Mom was in her robe, flipping through channels with one hand, eating reheated lasagna with the other. Martin didn't look up from his recliner. I cleared my throat. "I got cake." "Put it in the fridge," Mom muttered. "We just ate." Not even a glance, not even a smile. I set the cake on the counter slowly, carefully, as if I could control the weight that was slowly building in my chest. I waited. Maybe they were planning something, some awkward last-minute surprise. But the minutes passed. The TV blared. Martin laughed at something that wasn't funny. Nothing came. Dinner was already done. No one had waited. The table was still set for 2, not 3. And yet, I still sat with them, balancing a plate of cold meatloaf on my lap, telling myself it wasn't a big deal, that they'd simply forgotten, that families were messy, that love didn't always look like candles and cards. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered something truer. They weren't messy. They were done pretending I mattered. It started with a glass of water. I had barely made it halfway to the sink when Mom stood up and slid something across the kitchen table. I didn't even need to see it. I recognized the sound, the smooth plastic wheels scraping against the wood. A suitcase. My suitcase. Neatly packed, zipped closed. The red luggage tag with my name, Elise M., hanging limply from the handle. "You've had enough time," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was worse, flat, practiced, as if she'd rehearsed the line. "You're 25. It's time to move on." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. Martin muted the TV and leaned back in his recliner like he'd been waiting for this cue. "We've given you too many free rides, kiddo. It's time you learned how the world really works." My mouth opened, closed. My fingers curled around the counter's edge. "I pay half the mortgage," I said, quieter than I meant to. "The electric bill's under my name, groceries, the Wi-Fi. Mom, my paycheck has been covering you both for over 2 years, Martin scoffed. "Paying a few bills doesn't mean you get a lifetime stay at Hotel Martinson." Hotel? That's what he thought this was. Mom still wouldn't look at me. She just adjusted her robe, like my presence was making the air uncomfortable. "You called me freeloader," I said. Martin stood, walked over to the fridge, and grabbed a beer like nothing about this moment mattered. "You always were sensitive." I turned to Mom. "Say something." She finally looked at me, and that hurt more than the silence. Her eyes weren't sad. They weren't proud. They were resigned. "I think it's for the best," she said softly. "We've done what we could." A laugh slipped out, sharp and brittle. "What you could," I whispered. "I canceled vacations, Skipped birthdays, took double shifts so you wouldn't lose the house. I fixed your broken furnace in December, barehanded, while I pointed at Martin, watched football and complained about the thermostat. Martin raised his can. To resilience! I wanted to scream, to beg, but something inside me cracked instead. They weren't angry, they were done pretending. This wasn't a spontaneous blow-up. This was premeditated, coordinated. The suitcase wasn't a threat. It was a decision. And they had chosen today, my birthday, to make sure I'd never forget it. The cake in the fridge, the misspelled icing, the two-person dinner, the empty chair, all of it made sense now. I swallowed the sob clawing up my throat, walked to the table, gripped the suitcase handle with a steady hand. Got it, I said. Martin smiled like he'd just won a bet. Mom's eyes dropped back to the floor. I climbed the stairs without looking back. Each step creaked under me like a final judgment. Upstairs, in the hallway I used to race through as a child, I passed my own baby photo still hanging on the wall. Smiling, unaware. That little girl had no idea that one day the people she called family would pack her bags and call it love. My room looked smaller than it ever had, maybe because now it wasn't mine. I closed the door behind me softly, as if I didn't want to wake the past. The suitcase stood where I left it, zipped with precision I didn't recognize. I hadn't packed it. Mom had. She must have gone through my drawers while I was at work. Even my toothbrush was already in the front pouch. They hadn't just decided tonight to kick me out. They'd been planning this. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress groaning beneath me like it, too, was tired of holding me up. My eyes landed on the cake box I had carried upstairs. It sat on the nightstand, its plastic cover slightly fogged. One of the candles had snapped in half somewhere along the drive. One candle missing, one chair missing at dinner, one person missing in their story. I reached for my phone, half hoping for a message from anyone, someone who remembered what day it was. But there were no notifications, no texts, just a low battery warning, blinking like a slow heartbeat. I opened my banking app, hands cold. The joint account I shared with Mom, just under $300. I had been putting money into it every month for emergencies, like she'd asked. And now I realized the emergency was me, always me, keeping them afloat, plugging leaks they made. My emergency fund, the one I'd saved in secret for years, was gone, withdrawn in small amounts, always with her name beside the transaction. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Then I started to move. Slow, steady. One drawer at a time. I pulled my laptop from under the bed, opened my files, and clicked into the folders most daughters shouldn't need. Utilities, rent, insurance. Everything was under my name. I began unlinking them one by one. Water, electricity, internet. Their world, one I'd quietly propped up, began to flicker. Not out of spite, not revenge, survival. By the time the clock on my nightstand read 2:03 a.m., I had severed every digital tie I had to the house. All that was left was the sound of the wind pressing against the old windows and the cake. I looked at it one last time, still untouched. Then, without thinking, I slid it off the nightstand. It landed with a dull thud on the carpet, crumpling into itself. Happy birthday, Elise! And for the first time all night, I let myself cry. Not for what I was losing, but for everything I'd given that never meant enough. The next morning, the house was already pretending I'd never existed. No one knocked on my door. No one asked if I had a plan. The only sound was the clink of a fork against a plate downstairs and the muffled TV laugh track bleeding through the vents. I walked out without a word. The air outside was cold and dry, the kind of crisp that feels like glass against your lungs. My car, a beat-up hatchback they used more than I did, was parked crooked on the curb. I loaded the suitcase, the cake box still smashed in the passenger seat, and drove. I didn't have a place lined up, not really. Just an emergency contact, Clara, my old boss from the cafe I'd worked at in college. She answered my text with a 2-word reply, Come over. Clara's guest room was small, the bed lumpy, but it was warm. She handed me tea without asking questions and made space in the fridge without comment. That night, while scrolling through my socials, I saw it. A post in the Ridgefield community group. Martin had written, "Some daughters are raised to be grateful. Others become parasites. After everything we sacrificed for her, our Elise left us sick, broke, and heartbroken. Pray for us." Bile rose in my throat. And then the comments started pouring in. She always seemed ungrateful. Probably ran off with a man. Parents like that don't deserve this. I wanted to reply. I wanted to scream. But I didn't have to. Because the next comment changed everything. Isn't Elise the one who fixed their roof last year by herself? Didn't she work 2 jobs when her mom was sick? She paid my mom's pharmacy bill once. Quietly, without asking. Dozens more followed. Names I barely remembered. Neighbors, regulars from the cafe, a teacher from high school. People had seen more than I realized. They just hadn't spoken until now. The tide turned, slowly but surely. For the first time, their narrative cracked. Not because I fought it, but because people finally saw what I never dared show. I wasn't the villain, I was the glue. And I had stopped holding things together. The letter came in a manila envelope delivered to Clara's front porch on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Civil suit, filed by Martin, charges emotional manipulation, financial abandonment, elder neglect. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so vicious. I sat with the letter in my lap for almost an hour, letting the legal jargon sink in. The words didn't sting. They confirmed what I already knew. They weren't just trying to erase me. They wanted to punish me for walking away. Clara stood behind me, silent. Then she handed me her old business card, one from her lawyer days, and said, "Call now." By noon, I was on the phone with a legal aid volunteer in Columbus. I walked her through everything, quietly, methodically, the bills in my name, the savings I'd built and lost, the roof I fixed, the groceries I bought, the lies they posted. She didn't interrupt, just listened, then said, "You have a strong case. Actually, you may want to countersue." I paused. "I don't want revenge." "Good," she said. "Then let's go for justice." We filed a counterclaim. Financial exploitation under coercion. It sounded clinical, cold, but it was exactly what had happened. They didn't take my money because they asked. They took it because I believed I was loved. Mediation was set 2 weeks later. I walked into the courthouse wearing the same gray coat I'd worn on the day I left their house. The collar still smelled like vanilla cake and November wind. Martin and Mom sat at the long wooden table. His face was flushed, jaw clenched. Hers was streaked with makeup and rehearsed grief. When the lawyer presented my evidence, PDFs of bills, timestamps, repair receipts, Martin's facade cracked. "She's twisting it," he spat. "She's always been dramatic." But the room stayed quiet. The mediator, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, looked directly at him and said, "Mr. Martinson, these documents are clear. Your daughter supported this household financially for years." Mom reached for my hand as we were dismissed. "I didn't know he filed. Elise, please, don't do this." I looked at her for a long time and said nothing, because I was done explaining my pain to people who always used it as leverage. Outside the courthouse, the wind had picked up again, colder now, but I walked into it without flinching. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being pulled back. I moved into a studio the size of a memory, faded hardwood floors, a single window with peeling paint, a heater that groaned like it had been trying to retire for years, but it was mine. The rent came from my paycheck. The keys jingled in my palm when I unlocked the door, and no one stood behind me asking for favors, masked as love. I bought furniture secondhand, a couch that tilted slightly to the left, a table with scratches shaped like someone else's history, I cleaned everything until it felt like possibility instead of leftovers, and I planted a cactus on the windowsill, a plant that needed almost nothing but still dared to bloom. One afternoon, while unpacking the last box, I found it, the cake topper. That tiny plastic piece from the birthday that had ended it all, bent, cheap, a single candle, snapped at the base. I held it in my hand and stared. Once it had made me cry, now it made me smile. I placed it on a shelf, not as a symbol of what I'd lost, but of what I had survived. A few days later, someone slid a card under my door. No envelope, no signature, just a single sentence, handwritten in careful strokes. You were never the problem, Elise. I never found out who sent it. And I didn't need to, because I had already started to believe it myself. Mom called once more. I let it ring, then blocked the number. Not in anger, but in peace. Not every ending needs a confrontation. Some just need to stop echoing. I spent evenings by the window, watching the town lights blink to life one by one. I'd sip tea and listen to the radiator hiss, and for the first time in years, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom. When my birthday came again, I bought myself a cake. No one else was there. No gifts, no dinner. But this time, I lit all the candles, counted them twice, and when I blew them out, I didn't make a wish, because I finally understood. Some storms don't come to destroy you. They come to clear the path for who you were always meant to be.